Hello and welcome, guys, to another edition of Zero Hang It TV. This time it's a little bit different. I'm very lucky to be joined by Ollie Geale, the great man. He's done plenty, he has seen plenty, and the pandemic, he's got as interesting a story over that as anyone does. But before we get to that, he's a Saints man, so he's got plenty to touch on about what's going on at Moorabbin. But first for us, how are you, mate?
Mate, I'm really good. I have seen some things through the pandemic, not exclusively to do with sport either, just seen some things in my life. No, happy to be here, happy to chat anything. Saints, footy, pandemic.
No,
I love it.
It's good to have you on. The word pandemic, I think we'd got past that, then St Kilda had a mini one of their own for a few weeks there.
I wouldn't say mini. I feel like we live in a pandemic down there in Moorabbin, but we'll be right one day, fingers crossed.
Well, fingers crossed, man. We're seeing just this week, Ross Lyons bat, Banger Harvey's bat, Lenny came back obviously a few months ago. The band's getting back together. It's an interesting one because obviously the premiership success didn't come in that era, and it hasn't come really in any era for St Kilda bar a very long time ago in '66. So how do you feel about the band getting back together and those veterans coming back to the club?
Yeah, so obviously, look, my gut says I feel super bad for Brett. Yeah. Like, he was a great. He had, ended the last year on a winning record. In St Kilda colours, that's all we can ask for. And it was sad to see him go. But I slept on it after the press conference when Ross was announced, and I watched it 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And one thing I will say is that it's exciting to have good St Kilda people at the club. Yeah. Like, it just feels like sometimes with the Saints, it's if a job opportunity comes up, whether it be from a staff or player's perspective, you're probably not going to say no like, why not? But it doesn't feel like people are ever like that excited to go to Moorabbin. So I think right now, a really positive step in the right direction to have people that love the club. I don't exactly know what they mean by, we know the DNA of the club, but as a fan, I totally understand that. So, the idea of Hayes, Harvey, Ross in the coach's box at once, that is a really exciting prospect. And even hearing Ross talk about how, he's probably softened on things like he wants to hear from everyone in the box, and things like that. It is starting to become a really exciting time. And let's not forget, pick 32 at the draft. So with all those 4 pieces in a row, what can't we achieve?
the 4 pillars.
Yeah, big time.
You mentioned Ross saying he wants to be a little more hands off, perhaps. And I think he said his quote was he doesn't want to be in the weeds as much, whatever that meant in a Rossism, as much as it ever was. But obviously, that might mean delegating to Hayes, who was obviously pretty influential at the Giants with their midfield, and to Harvey, who's spent some time at Collingwood as a senior coach when Bucks got the sack, and then obviously at Hawthorn. How do you feel their role? If Ross is going to be a bit more hands-off, I mean, is that why you're a bit more excited about the likes of Hayes and Harvey coming in? Obviously, Corey Enright playing a big role. Yeah,
well, I don't want him to be too hands-off because I still really rate him as a coach. Lest we forget, he took 2 teams to 3 grand finals, so he knows what he's on about. But I think my gut instinct says of what we've seen, and it's still really early days from this week, depending on when this goes out. It's just exciting that it seems like he's had a look at himself. We know how well he speaks in the media, but I think the time away from the game has probably given him the opportunity to look at where he might have gone wrong, how he might change things in the future. So I think that's exciting. It's always really. It's an interesting one going back to, sharks should always swim forwards, never swims backwards. So it's nice to know that if we are going to go back, it's not going to be the exact same. He's open to learn and to get better, and I think that's why it feels like the right decision.
Do you think that they got the Saints ball with the review? And like, we've seen a few reviews going recently with Carlton, Essendon, and then when they won St Kilda, obviously it was more internal review. Yeah. But we're seeing that once those reviews happen, experienced coaches are the way those clubs are going. Obviously, Rats was an experienced coach in himself, but Ross slightly more experienced. Do you feel like they paint themselves into a corner maybe perhaps by entering that review, that if they get they said they were going to move on from Rats, their options were pretty limited, and Adamuse seemed like the likely candidate if they were going to go through a process. Did they maybe paint themselves into a corner?
100%. And also, look, let's not speak out of school here, but it felt a bit stiff having Noble come in and leading up that review. Those in glass houses probably shouldn't throw too many stones. But look, it's an important part of the game, and it's just, it just feels, if you look throughout the season, when you look at some of the names that had been floating around, the likes of an Essendon or a North Melbourne job as well, you're thinking, why didn't the review happen then almost? Or like, why was if that's where the powers that be were feeling. And you can't tell me it didn't happen just off that review. Like, they would have been talking about it throughout the year. So it does feel a little bit like they did put themselves in that corner where we're going, right, we've done the review, it's not positive, who have we got?
Yep.
You know, who have we got? So it's a sticky situation, but I think, and we can have this chat this time next year, but it feels like the best possible scenario has probably come out of that review.
Yeah, you can understand. I mean, Ross, as you said, he's proven, he's got the experience, he's got the brownie points or the money.
Well,
in the bank,
I'm 28 years of age. I haven't seen a lot of success at that club, but growing up, he was the man to give me the most joy out of watching football. So how could I not be excited?
Does that, because my reference back would be as a Manchester United fan when Jose Mourinho departed and we went to Ollie and Michael Carrick in, Mike Phelan came back and all the old boys that had success came back to United, and then it was beautiful for a moment and disastrous for the next. Yeah. So that's my kind of point of reference. I look at it and say, it's lovely on the exterior. Yeah. Is there a worry that maybe it's relying too much on nostalgia as opposed to maybe just getting the best in class?
Absolutely. I think the difference, and I can't believe I'm going to say the sentence comparing Manchester United to St Kilda. That doesn't roll off the tongue very well. I think the difference is, unfortunately, the brutal world that is coaching AFL football or coaching in any sport is that you can have a real soft spot for a coach, but it's not like it is with a player. So say when you take in a club legend like an Ollie Gunnar Solskjaer, you go, United fans loved him. Yeah. During the Gruel, and I'm an Arsenal fan, and Arteta was a decent player, but he was never anyone's number one. Yeah. But if Thierry Henry came in and had the worst season of all time, and then we had to get rid of him, I'd be devastated. It just wouldn't feel right. So, look, if it all ends terribly with Ross Lyon, we move on, But I think if the decision was to bring, like, Robert Harvey in as the senior coach and that didn't go well, that would be tough to... I don't know how I'd be able to tear apart, go, do we just ignore him as a fantastic player? Yeah. And now he's the coach. So I think it's different as a coach.
Absolutely. Now, moving on to yourself and touching on a bit of your journey, obviously what kind of brought you into a bit of limelight was the pandemic and you being stuck on the other side of the world, and you had to make the best of it. Everyone had to make the best of those COVID years. Obviously incredibly difficult to do so, but you kind of jumped on the front foot over in the UK and along with BT Sport kind of turned to taking our great game. And we were lucky enough to still have a game rolling on. Obviously the Premier League and a lot of other world football stopped over in that part of the world. Yeah. I mean, what kind of drove you to go off and say, hey, let's get some AFL content going over in the UK? Was it because you had nothing else to do, or what were kind of the steps that got that process started?
Yeah, for sure. So I left Australia in 2018, I think, and had like a good little run there before COVID, really. Finding my feet working for TalkSport, and that was really great. Radio station based in London, which was fantastic. And then I started working full time with Optus, doing all their Premier League coverage with Schwarzer, and it was just a real dream come true. But then, as you said, it hits, and you go, the pandemic hits, and you go, right, now what? Legitimately. So I was doing a podcast with Schwarzer for Optus, Two Sharp Reds at the time, and that sort of gave me enough hope that I could stay in England. And at that time as well, I don't think anyone realised that you wouldn't be able to get home. Yeah. And so at that point, I had a girlfriend, I had a lease, I had a job. You can't just
set up,
just totally leave. Yeah. Because as I said, you there was an opportunity to go back at the start, but then you never think in a million years, hey, 6-7 months down the line, you're going to be stuck there. So I thought, okay, there's enough reason to stick about, and the podcast will get me through enough. And then, it felt like this wild opportunity with BT. So BT Sport, very much like Fox Sports in Australia, or actually very much like Optus Sport. So BT phone network over there that have then branched into pay TV sport. Yep. And they had been showing the rights to the footy for quite some time. I'm going to guess anywhere between 5-10 years, probably even longer. It's always been around. Yep. They would play upwards of 4 to 5 games around generally. And so the heavy lifting, I suppose, had already been done. I think it's very difficult to go to a broadcaster and say, do you want to play the game for starters? You're going to have to buy the rights. We're going to find time for it in the schedule. But so that was done. So that was fantastic. But reached out to them and said, hey, look, let's call a spade a spade. You've got all these massive sport fans in England that are now working from home. And I know what it was like working from home. You were pretty bored,
pretty drab.
You know. So anything to get you by, and especially, you know, if I think back to the Wild West that was the footy festival of games on, you know, every day and at all different times. If you had a Friday night, Saturday night game, or even a game out in Perth, depending on how the timings worked, it actually was an unbelievable time slot in the UK. It was like 10, 11 a.m. on a Friday morning. You're thinking,
great way to start.
How good's that? You know, so you know, you're going to have more eyes on the game than we would have if you know, it was a normal world.
Yeah.
So that was essentially the decision, and we said, you know, let's create a show for people getting into the game, and we saw, especially over in the States with Pat McAfee, and you know, he stumbled on the game and what he was able to do, and it was that feeling of, Let's provide some context. So, you know, you would still have the 30-minute build-up that, you know, Channel 7 or Fox would provide. But if you've never seen the game before, it's not very user-friendly. So, you know, let's do our own version and also speak to, you know, the expats that are there. And so it was a really great opportunity to speak with current footy players, talk about the game that we're going into, but then also hear from these fantastic, you know, grassroots stories that I had never heard of.
Yeah.
Like some of these competitions, the Euros that they do, that you're like the last one was in Edinburgh, and you've got like Poland versus Germany, and you're going, what? At Aussie Rules?
Yeah,
like it's actually incredible.
At our footy club down at the Caulfield Bears, we've got, I'd be remiss to name a number, but there'd be at least 6 or 7 Pommy blokes down there, and they absolutely love it. But halfway through the last couple of years, I think it was like 2018 and 19, they had to duck off at the International Cup. Yeah. So they missed the 4-week period in the middle of the season. They're playing with the UK. They were using our ground, so before the twos would go on, and then we'd have to have their game, the international game would go on in the middle, right in the middle, and then the ones had to start a bit later on. So we're watching. I think we watched the game. It was like Ukraine versus England at one point.
Isn't it amazing? I was just like, I've never heard of that. And watching my best mate over there, Jay Trelaw, he's an expat and works in teaching, but has been able to, you know, do coaching badges, and now he coaches the Great Britain women's side, and they've just you know gone out to the Czech Republic to play. And you're thinking, how amazing is it that that, you know, whether it be expat Aussies or Europeans, have an opportunity to stay in touch with the game and continue to make it grow. But also from their perspective, you know, he might want to come back to Australia, and he's been away for 15 years, but has still been able to stay involved with the game and learn and develop his skills as a coach. And I just think it's fantastic. So that was essentially the idea of the Aussie Rules Show, was to provide a user-friendly version of a pre-game traditional show, but then also hear from people within the UK and throughout Europe. Yeah,
so you speak about user-friendly, which is obviously incredibly important. How do you talk to an audience that, like, what perception do you have of your audience? Because you don't want to talk down to them and dumb the game down too much, but as you said, in and of itself, Aussie Rules is a pretty complicated game. What was your perception going in of your demographic? I mean, what level of advancement of AFL skills and setups and stuff? Where did you kind of have to find the balance?
So going into the first season of the show throughout COVID, we knew that there would be more people watching that are new to the game. So we've been doing it for a few seasons now, and it's probably swayed towards the demographic of genuine footy fans that have, you know, stuck around, or expats or whatever. So at the time it was like, okay, there's going to be a lot of Brits watching. So we absolutely made sure we got as many Irish, you know, names on as possible, which I thought was fantastic. It was great to even just chat about like why they came over in the first place, and just provided a little bit of context of you know, how they even stumbled upon the game themselves. So that was really good. I remember the first episode we did was literally a tutorial on the game. It was like, just here are the terms, like even just like the lingo that I don't even realise, we don't even think about, because it's just part of our vocab here. Yeah. You know, like I can't, like even the one that really blew them away was like, you know, so anyway, you got home and away season, then we got finals, and at the end of it, you got the granny. And then I remember seeing on Twitter, like, who? Someone's grandma. Like legitimately, and you think, right, okay, we've got to strip it back a bit. We've got to, start again. But you're spot on. You can't talk down to them. And I don't like that. You know, like last night I watched the Nitro World Series, action sports, and And, I've never seen that before, but, they did a really good job at just explaining everything step by step. So it felt like that was the way to do it. But also, I say I didn't play, but I did play for school seconds between 2008 and 9. So I think I know a thing or two about the game. But I need to remind myself as well that I haven't played 250 games at the highest level. So I like to come into things as a bit of a professional fan, really. I'm one of you. I just love the game, and I'm going to get things wrong because I'm not. As I said, I'm not a legend of the game, but it's all about just sharing the passion for the sport and talking about little moments that that's why we love the game. Like you might not have realised, but they're the moments, they're the little 1%ers that we love, and highlighting characters of the sport as well, and putting a lot of effort into making sure that we were championing some of those guys. When that show started, Eddie's pocket, was through the roof. It was why so many people loved watching the Adelaide Crows at the time, and really explaining how special of a player Eddie Betts is, and just things like that.
Who were some of the players that really kind of that the people in the UK and across Europe really kind of gravitated towards? Who were some of those characters that you noticed would get a lot better reception?
Anyone with a haircut. Quite legitimately, and you go, I hate it, but all right, we'll just find whatever. Like we'll just get stuck into Bailey Smith, the Josh Bruce type, any of those sort of characters that just were a bit different looking to your traditional English lot that you certainly don't see in the Premier League very often. So some of those guys. But I noticed as the weeks went on, the highlight around Geelong and the likes of Zach Tui in particular. They loved, so that was really fantastic. But I would say anyone with a haircut. So Baz Lanka was very, very popular.
Universal Baz Lanka.
And I did a really good job as a St Kilda fan at making sure we touch base as much as possible. There's actually a clip of when we beat Gold Coast. We've had a few tight games against the Suns, and when the song was on, we just put me in the corner singing it along live, like little things like that. So I always make sure there's a bit of red, white and black love in there.
Yeah, you got to find it somewhere.
Big time.
Absolutely. You talk about it there and it sounds unbelievable. COVID, obviously a lot of people had tough times, but you're over in the UK, you're working, you're covering footy. It sounds like the dream.
Yep.
Obviously there would have been obstacles though, both personally and professionally.
Yeah.
Can you take us through what those kind of would have been? Because obviously being away from home, it might be a little bit harder to have that network of support, or both work-wise and personally. Yeah,
it was really tough, and you can only speak about personal experiences, and I assume you were probably based in Melbourne for the large part, and my heart goes out to anyone in the longest lockdown city in the world. It's not easy. I think for me it was difficult knowing that you've got a visa and it's ticking down, and you've got all these wonderful opportunities so professionally it was probably looking good. I'd walk out of there with a few more strings to my bow, which is fantastic, but you're also missing out on all these wonderful opportunities, particularly with Optus Sport. We were robbed of the Euros at the time. Yeah. We would have been going, all over the continent and, travelling up and down the country for the Premier League, and, missed out on a lot of really special games in some of, the most famous stadiums. Yeah. So that was really tough. I suppose personally it was difficult with the time zone as well to if you wake up, if you have a sleep in, you've missed the chance to speak to your family, things like that. And that was really tough. And you're living in a small apartment in Peckham in London, and you can't leave. And it was going into summer as well there at the start. And so it was quite hot, and, you're just stuck inside. And as I said, I had a girlfriend at the time, and you can't even go see her, and just little things like that were, definitely played a role. But I think what everyone went through in Melbourne compared to what I went through was a different story. With Optus it was as well. I was able to go every Saturday to the early kickoff, so it was a great opportunity to jump in the car and you're going up and going to a game with no one in the stands. Yeah. Like that was, yes, I missed out on going to Anfield or Old Trafford, with
full pack,
with a full crowd. That was a shame. Again, but then, fingers crossed. But then you're sitting in the stands with, the best one was at Everton. It was Everton against West Brom. Slaven Bilic got a red card. He was sent up into the stands, and he had to sit next to me and the West Brom media guy. And you're sitting there going, like, this is bizarre. And then, like, you're trying to do your report as well, and you're talking about players, but they can hear you.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, this is embarrassing. This is really awkward. So, that was great. So that was also really cool to be able to get out of the house. I was really lucky to get that opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's surreal when you think back to what Melbourne was like, and it seems unbelievable.
How did you go? Were you all right? Or?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to spend most of my time with my partners and with her family, so that was an absolute godsend. But yeah, I mean, I probably got the lucky end of it. I was just working away here from home, so I mean, I wasn't too affected. Very lucky by that, and then just got to plug away. And obviously,
what recipes did you learn? Because everyone learned a few.
I'm a pretty proficient cook anyway. So I like to say I just stuck to the ones I had.
Yeah.
My partner can cook now, but she could not cook at that time.
Did you change your answer very quickly there?
Yeah, well, I ruptured my Achilles about 4 or 5 months ago now, so she had no choice but to learn.
Sure, yeah. Can I ask, how does injuring your Achilles affect your kitchen skills?
You can't stand up. At all. You just you go from bed to crutches to the couch, and that is your movement completely done. So every now and then you have to come out with a pan and does that look good? And,
sure, why not?
Not in a position to complain here, but I can't complain too much about what I went through, obviously. But yeah, Melbourne probably wasn't the ideal spot to live, but we got away for a couple of golf trips with mates. So
perfect.
We got out at summer. I think we missed both summers in lockdown, which was a relief. Being over in the UK, obviously you didn't dumb down the show too much. How was it received? And then did you ever notice times where it would dip, peak? How did you kind of gauge those kind of numbers?
Yeah, so what was really interesting, I've got a fabulous team that we work with, and they're all Brits who, a couple of the editors, Chippers and Paul, love the game, bizarrely. So like when they heard that the show was happening, they were like, can we be involved? Yeah. And then Jane, our director, is fantastic, but she had never seen the sport before. And so we were all like a bit of a misfit group of people like learning on the spot. And so what was interesting is, the way that the show would work is we would play it on a Wednesday and it would be a preview to a particular game. Traditionally, it would be that Friday or Saturday slot, 10 a.m, 11 a.m. over there. And it was learning about, what games to highlight. So say, for example, we'd go, should we do that? And you go, well, no, actually, because it's Anzac Day weekend. We should, or, Indigenous round and things like that. So it was learning what games we should, take preference for. Yeah. There are a few too early times, like a few sort of 6 a.m. numbers that probably didn't do as well, but you kind of had to, because as the rolling fixtures were being announced, storylines were changing between different teams that we needed to highlight, that going into the week before we probably didn't think too much about. There was a lot of reaction to my wardrobe. Yep. I noticed. That was the big thing. Big shout out to my friendly Twitter troll, Milk Monster. He said, if I wanted to hear this much drivel, I would have watched a Donald Trump press conference. And then he said, so just little things like that.
I feel like we all have one. Like you copied from a few on Twitter.
I love
There's always one.
Keeps me grounded. He goes, I don't know about that shirt. You go, fair enough. I'll change it around.
I have one. He's always there. Good or bad, but he's there.
It's like your nan on Facebook. Like it's you're always good for a like or a retweet or a comment. Yeah, just get that algorithm ticking. The early days for sure, when I knew it was just people new to the sport were going, hey, what was that? Like what, it could have been anything, like a player didn't take a bounce, ran too far. 50-metre penalty that looked like it went further. Explaining how down at GMHBA it's a different size ground, compared to, it's like, actually, great point, never thought about that. That's a bit weird, things like that. So, it was interesting communicating, some of those questions that I hadn't even really asked myself, because you just grow up in the... You go, fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a few players that caught the attention. I think fans everywhere would like to know what teams maybe caught the hearts of people over in another continent. Well,
so one thing I would, again, other than trying to get everyone to become Saints fans, which I did, but I tried really, really hard, I was saying, take the approach of how most people do in Australia if you're a Premier League fan. So unless you've got a reason to go for a team, you've got to think strategically. It's like, okay, if you're coming over, where do you want to spend the most of your time? Given the fact they've got such crap weather, you're thinking they're going to like, Perth, Adelaide, Queensland teams. So there was a lot of love, particularly... Port Adelaide was, I noticed, particularly with the Never Tear Us Apart, and it's the closest thing to a Premier League atmosphere before a game. So Port was insanely popular. I think that the romance around the time as well. Brisbane, we're doing so well, and hosting the grand final that year as well at the Gabba. They were very popular, and I think it's hard to It pains me. It makes sense though that like the Swannies, like you got to spend a lot of time in Sydney if you're going to come down and things like that. So yeah, a few of those location-based teams, not so much on like the Suns. You're like, mate, no.
Please don't.
Yeah, but I want to go to Gold Coast. Well, fair enough. But some of those names definitely got flown around a bit. Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? How the interstate teams outside of Victoria seem to be the more popular ones. Where it's
you said that probably. You mentioned with the Premier League, the crossover there is you probably don't find. I think a lot of my mates will follow. I think there's only a couple that followed London-based teams. We've got one Chelsea, one Arsenal fan. Yeah, but everyone else has kind of gotten away from it because it's so crowded in London that there's teams everywhere. I think it's a bit like here. There's teams everywhere in Victoria. So
there's nothing like going to a one-club town. Yeah. It's the best. Going to Newcastle and it's just epic.
St James's Park as well.
Yeah. So much fun. Have you heard about that game? Did it once with my mates. It's a Soccer Saturday game. So Soccer Saturday, if you've not heard of it, it starts at midday when like a few games start, I guess, but more so 3 o'clock. But they just roll on all tiers, right? Yeah. But first goal of the day, doesn't matter who it is, you go to that town for the night. And it's a real lucky dip. Like you could get a good championship game, maybe at the time like Leeds, if they score, you're like, how good's this? We're spending the night in Leeds. We've had some shockers. We got Grimsby when we did it. And you don't need to know too much about Grimsby, but if you've seen the movie Grimsby with Sacha Baron Cohen, it's pretty indicative of what you can expect.
I'll give a shout out to Grimsby because I think in one FIFA they were the worst rated team, and one of my good friends became a Grimsby man purely for the love of the underdog. So he won't like hearing Grimsby slander, but I think
I will say this though as well, positive. For many years, Tasmanian boy from Launceston, Anthony Limbrick was the assistant coach. So there's a bit of an Aussie angle there too.
There we go. Just going to 2020 quickly, just again, when there was that gap after round one, so obviously I think, I can't remember how long the gap was now, but it felt like it was 2 years. That gap between round one and eventually round two, what did you guys do then? How do you kind of maintain interest when there's no games?
Well, so at that point we weren't doing anything. Yeah. So going into the start, I'm trying to remember how this happened. What was the timeline again? Because it's so long ago. So did we play round one? We
played round one
as expected.
Yeah. And then on the Sunday, I think North were playing St Kilda.
Yes.
Just before Melbourne played West Coast. The AFL.
Yes. So that's right. So going in, I hadn't been in touch with BT Sport at the time about the regular season. Yeah. It was only until we pulled the pin here, and then there was a real clear timeline. So BT also played Bundesliga and the Premier League, so they're their two big sort of heavy hitters on the station, and it was clear that was months away. Like that just wasn't happening. So that was really when we started having the background conversations, and the only thing we really did going into the lead up was just did a bit of a press release to say that it would be happening, and this is the sport, and we hope you join in, but. Really, it was just going in blind, and that week we had a few ads go out to sort of say, hey, this is going to be the only live sport in the world, and it's on, so tune in. Yeah. But it was only until everything sort of was binned off that the idea came about. So because I really don't think that the show probably would have happened. Yeah. Like if COVID wasn't around, probably would have felt like too long of a stretch to be able to justify. But luckily now, since then, we've been able to solidify a spot, which is fantastic.
Yeah, unreal. Did you ever hear from the AFL when you're out there doing the hard yards? Did you ever get a...
No, couldn't believe it. I thought, we are doing God's work over here. We are spreading the game. I have been a little surprised on that, I must admit. So hopefully one day we can get a bit more recognition because I think it's great, and I think the work that the grassroots teams are doing need some more recognition as well. We had a guy on from AFL Poland. This blew me away. He had been taking the team bus into Ukraine and bringing back refugees.
Jesus.
With the team bus and just like supporting them through the footy club. And you just like with all due respect to some of the scandals that we might hear, you know, that we just keep talking about and talking about, and that sometimes it feels like, geez, there's a really feel-good story here that is, you know, we're portraying Australians and Aussie rules in such a great light, you know, in a different part of the world, that I think it needs to be celebrated a little bit more. So yeah, I think going forwards, maybe our kind of goal and aim would be to get more recognition of, you know, it's solidified over there to an extent, which is great, but it's, you know, we're really pushing. So to the best of my knowledge, it was the first and only AFL show outside the country, and we're really proud of that. And so, yeah, if we get to do it all again next year, it would be great to kind of have a bit more of alignment with things. But to be honest as well, like, you know, that will probably come from being back here on the ground as well, and, you know, actually meeting, you know, media officers at clubs and, you know, just blindly emailing, you know, being like, can we speak to Buddy Franklin, please? Like, nah, buddy, like, what even is this? Are you on YouTube or what's the go? Like, you know, so that's been a challenge, but it feels like hopefully if we get to do it all again next year, we'll sort of try and combine forces a little bit more. Yeah,
so fingers crossed. Now, wanted to kind of touch into your APL knowledge and your AFL knowledge. We've seen over trade and free agency period, or that go home factor, and a lot of players now are heading back to their home state, and we've seen a few like Jason Francis lasted 1 year, and I think Adam Cherry was 3 or 4 at Fremantle last season. We're seeing it's becoming quicker, and Tanner Bruin, I think 2 years at the Giants. So when we reference that to the APL, and players are coming from all across the world, and there'd be more foreign players than English players, and there's not an English coach in the Premier League. I think it's Graham Potter, and maybe a couple of others, and only no English managers won the Premier League. So we see that fluidity by the world game, and the freedom to kind of go and move around. Is there something like academies, like we see a lot of the top end teams, and even the smaller teams have their own academies? We see a lot of the top academies start off from anywhere from 5, 6, 7, 8, and nurture these players all the way through, and then they don't always play for a Man United or an Arsenal or a Chelsea. They can then go off to smaller clubs and smaller leagues, but is there maybe a way AFL, because AFL have their next generation academies, is there something they could adopt to maybe cure that go-home factor, or something you've seen that works over in the APL?
Well, I think unfortunately for us is that obviously it's such a bigger, you know, world over there that, you know, even if you don't make it in the Premier League, you can still have a very successful, you know, career at a League One or even League Two level. I personally think that it's less about what the AFL can do, and it's more culturally. You know, I think it's you know, so I'm from Tasmania, and I always knew that okay, Tassie's home, but to do some of the things and see some of the things that I want to see, I'm going to have to get off the island at some point. But I just feel like the time I spent overseas, it just opened my eyes to how, you know, people are just comfortable in, you know, giving things a go, and I suppose it's, you know, if you live in England, you're an hour away from France, you know, like, so these amazing opportunities when you are only an hour away, you know, I can understand, you know, it's a little easier, but, you know, it's incredible some of the, you know, the situations that, you know, some South American people, you know, if you're coming from Africa or Asia, or, you know, you really, it's amazing, you know, to leave home at like 11 or 12 and send your kid over there and to persist and then stick around. It's actually incredible, and that's why I think it's more cultural than anything else. I think, you know, when you look at, you know, Richmond do some incredible things with a lot of their players when they come in, and, you know, how can we protect you? Like, how can we look after you? How can we make this transition as easy as possible? I don't know what else a footy club can do. And from all reports, it feels like North probably would have done everything in their power to be able to look after Horne-Francis as best as possible. You know, I think it's a cultural change that Australians might need to go through. And we are so far away from everything else, considering, you know, if you're flying from Melbourne to even Bali, you're still, how long, 8 hours away or something, you know? So we like to stick around. So yeah, I'm not convinced that it's the AFL's problem. I think it's how you grow up, and the mentality of your family, and being able to, you know, I do feel for, you know, case in point, I know Lloyd Meek, who has just gone to Freo from Freo to Hawthorn, And you go, you know, when he was drafted to Freo, I'm sure he would have been stoked, but, you know, he wouldn't have been, like, totally stoked to uproot his entire life, but being able to stick it out for as long as he has, like, you know, it's character building, and it's 100%. Good for you, and it's you know, you can meet new people and you know, have a real affinity with a new city. So I think it's how you grow up and your mentality rather than the club's or the league's problem.
Yeah, I think we sort of see how list managers approach that as well now. If it is that kind of mentality that people, they might not just draft from the state that their club's based, but they might ask those questions a little more.
I think you have to. I think you have to.
Especially now,
Yeah, but it just blows me away that it is that much of a problem. Yeah. You know, 45, 50-minute flight from Adelaide to Melbourne. Like, sorry, but that's just me.
Coming from someone who lives on the other side of it, I think you're in a better spot than most to make that comparison. Now, just a few more before we wrap up. Now, you're a Tassie boy, as you've mentioned. The 19th licence is a hot debate. Obviously, I'd assume you're pro 19th licence, but can you maybe take us into a few of the pros that you think it would do for Tassie and how it could maybe work?
Well, I left Tassie in 2012. And every time I go back, I could be away for a month and go back. I could be away for a year and go back. That state is changing at a rate of knots. It's scary. It is so exciting to see that, you know, being able to maintain its values and its essence that I don't think will ever leave Tasmania, but being able to improve all those areas that we probably needed to. It's an exciting time to go to Tassie just as a tourist, right? Yeah. So you throw in, I can only imagine, and I did some work with the Hurricanes when the Big Bash was really firing, and it was a great time to be in the city. It was fantastic. We've seen already what the Jack Jumpers has been able to do, and seriously, I don't think basketball is that popular in the state, but it's just the fact that they've got now a team to be proud of and something to get behind and something to do, and everyone loves the Jack Jumpers, and it's not about the sport. So then you take into consideration a sport that's the most highly participated, you know, game throughout the youth, you know, and you think about the likes of all the players that have been able to grace our great game and do it at such a high level, you know. Darryl Baldock, only, you know, captain to lift the trophy for St Kilda. He's a Tassie boy. You know, you just think the pedigree that we've got and the love for the sport that we have in that state, it's crazy that it's taken this long. But I can guarantee, with the plans that you've seen as well for the new stadium, I think Blundstone Arena is fantastic. The only thing is it's a little hard to get to. You know, if I think back to when you go out to Amy, you know, in Adelaide, it's a completely different city now that you're at Adelaide Oval. You know, being able to go out for dinner before or after, it's revolutionised that city. So, you know, having it, if we got that stadium by the wharf there in Hobart, nothing better. It's, you know, go down to Salamanca Market on a Saturday, you know, Frogmore Creek Winery, some of those places, and be able to go and watch a game of footy. And not with all due respect, not a crap game of footy either. Like, one thing that has always really annoyed me when hearing about, you know, some people in footy go, well, they should be happy we've got X amount of games already. And I'm like, okay, maybe fair enough. But no one's coming out on a Sunday afternoon to watch North Melbourne, West Coast Eagles, depending on where they're sitting at the time, and you don't go for either of those two teams. That game's not going to get anyone in Melbourne, you know, with all due respect. And it just feels like there's been that narrative around Tasmanians should just be lucky that there's something on at the time. Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't really work like that, you know. So if there is a team to get behind and it's a Saturday night game and they're doing well, it would be an incredible thing for Hobart and the state. And that's the only other... That's the only speed bump I can foresee, because where there's a big rivalry between North and South, so it wouldn't have to, you know, we couldn't just be based in Hobart, it'd have to be shared around. But I think, you know, the work that the Big Bash with the Hurricanes have done in, you know, they're the Hobart Hurricanes, but we play a lot of games at UTAS Stadium, and the work they do up in Penguin, Devonport, Latrobe and all the rest of it, it shares the love, and there's a real vibe around Tasmania at the moment, so I'd be so excited.
Yeah, I think the Jack Jumpers, as I said, I think they've kind of pave the way now. So if the AFL do want to go that route, I think it's going to work. There's any doubt about that. Now, before we go, mate, what's on the cards for you for the end of this year and the start of next?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. So I've only been back since the start of the footy season. So traditionally my year had been planned out a little smoother with footy then into the Premier League. So now we're in an interesting spot of figuring out sort of what's next. Luckily, we've got plenty of cricket obviously coming up. So I'm just closing my eyes, hoping for the best and sending the old resume out. But no, it'll work itself out. But yeah, now I'm back. It's just finding my feet again in the landscape here and seeing what will happen. And fingers crossed, we can do it all again next season with BT Sport.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. We'll have our eyes peeled and hopefully it comes back. We can all tune in and maybe get a different appreciation of how the sport's broadcast, mate. But thank you so much for coming on. We can't thank you enough for your time.
No, thank you very much, mate. It's an absolute pleasure.
Beautiful.
Nice one. Was that all right?
Unreal, mate. That was brilliant.
Cool.
Love that.
Good stuff.
I'll get into that light one day.
Oh, yeah. Really? Yeah.
Every time I've done look at it and then it's just an eye.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Don't blink.
Oh, yeah. I didn't enjoy it when we first started the show. It was from my apartment.
Oh,
and we have to log on at like 6 a.m. and you turn that light on. It's like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's taking time for the eyes.
Yeah.